It's no secret I'm not the biggest fan of Tom King as a writer, especially his stuff at DC Comics. With Wonder Woman, the first issue wasn't very good. The second issue wasn't very good, and now that I'm on the third one, it's just really bad. And I took something very personal away from this. Now, in the second issue, something that really bothered me, because Tom King was in the CIA. He was out there in Iraq during wartime. This is the way I took it, and you can take it however you want. It felt like he doesn't appreciate or have any type of empathy for like U.S. service members. Now, when Tom King was in Iraq, it would have been like 19-year-old soldiers on the gate protecting the base, or 19-year-old Marines, or perhaps even airmen protecting the base or whatever, that were putting their lives on the line every day to make sure that he didn't have to worry about somebody driving in and blowing him up with a bomb and stuff like that. We put our young men and women in a lot of harm's way, and we certainly have over the past like 20 years, over 20 years really, when we just pulled out of Afghanistan or whatever. And there was like a moment in the second issue to where they had gotten like a brigade or something out there to combat Wonder Woman. And she was like swinging tanks and knocking people down, probably murdering young male and female service members alike, left and right in combat. Colonel Steve Trevor, who would have been in charge of these people, who would have been in charge of protecting them and taking care of them, was smiling at the end of it like he was really happy because Wonder Woman had inflicted so much damage in all these young soldiers, out on the battlefield. And I was like, man, I just wish Tom King would have a greater appreciation for all the young men and women that were putting their asses on the line for him and show a little bit of respect rather than, Steve Trevor being so happy about it. Because, when you're in a leadership position, and I wasn't a colonel, I was a master sergeant in the Air Force. I did my 20 something years and retired. I was a senior NCO. I was in a leadership position. The mothers and fathers of America have put a trust in you over their children to make sure that you're going to do everything in your power to take care of them when they're out there with you, whether it be on the battlefield or a TDY or wherever, on their home life and stuff, that you're going to watch over them and make sure that they're taken care of, while they're away from their families and whatever. And I took that responsibility very, 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 very seriously. And I don't think the way that Tom King portrayed Steve Trevor in that moment, it kind of told me he doesn't understand that responsibility. He certainly doesn't, in my interpretation, you can say I'm wrong, whatever, this is my opinion. From what I saw, he doesn't really appreciate the amount of sacrifice and the real life stuff that people were having to go through to protect his ass while he was in a war zone. And in this third issue, he takes it way too far, way too fucking far. And there's a moment, well, there's a lot of moments, but there's a part of this story, it just made my stomach churn. And normally when I do a comic book review, I'm not going to so much review Wonder Woman #3. I'm going to talk about this thing that I absolutely hate. And if there's a little time at the end, I might talk about a couple other things that I don't think work. I read a comic book twice to make sure that I fully understand it, comprehend it. And yes, these are the things that I want to talk about. This is the order that I want to do. This is the point I want to get across in the video. I couldn't actually force myself to go back and read Wonder Woman 3. Like once was enough. And, unless somebody sends me a message or I'm told about something that absolutely needs to be covered, I'm not going to venture into this comic book anymore because I'm basically sick to my stomach about the storyline. So let's get into it and why I'm not feeling good about this one. The thing I'm talking about mostly is this conversation that's going on between the Sovereign, the patriarchal character that Tom King introduced to be the main villain for Wonder Woman in his run, and this kid. He's a Marine Corps corporal or something like that. He's a lower ranking individual. He was on the battlefield when they fell to Wonder Woman. She basically just destroyed them all with swinging tanks around and, probably killing his friends, by the dozens, doing all this stuff. And he brings them in here. He has this conversation with him about what happened. We would prefer hearing now more about your experience in the field with that hero and her lasso. Yeah, I don't know. Wasn't like a lot to it or whatever. We fired at her. Nothing worked. She was charged. She was like swinging a tank. So we fell back and retreated. It didn't take forever or anything. Oh, yes, we see. And tell us, was all that battle hard on you? Traumatic, perhaps? Seeing a girl humiliate your brothers? Dude, no, I mean, whatever. She's a superhero. We lost. Fight another day, get another paycheck, Isn't like I'm going to cry about it or something. Basically trying to really go into like PTSD and post-traumatic stress disorder. And you were humiliated by a girl on the field of battle. How do you feel about this? And, he to having a kind of a normal response or whatever. Nothing too bad about this, but every time Tom King tries to lean into like PTSD or lean into psychiatric issues that come about because of combat and stuff like that, we've seen Bruce Wayne try to kill himself when he was like a little kid. We've seen Mr. Miracle trying to kill himself. We saw Mr. Terrific be relieved that his wife and unborn son died because he wasn't supposed to be a dad. He wasn't ready for it because it was that PTSD. We've seen numerous children killed in Tom King's runs, and he likes to put the stuff in there because it makes him deep or whatever. But he never really handles it with care, and obviously the best example of that is Heroes in Crisis, which has permanently scarred his reputation as a comic book writer. And that was supposed to be him really tackling the idea of PTSD in combat or whatever. But where he goes with this after it, because the Sovereign has the Lasso of Lies, it makes my stomach turn. And I got a lot of stuff to say, but I want to get through setting up why this upset me so much and give some real life stories and some real life explanation of why this is handled so poorly and done for no reason whatsoever other than Tom King wanting to be edgy and be known for that. It occurs to us you may be mistaken, son. Your tussle with Wonder Woman was highly onerous on you, perhaps even devastating. Oh, yes, sir. That is true. It was. I felt devastated. Yes, sir. The way she fought your boys, it undermined your manhood. This woman robbed you of your own gender. And who are you then? You're so confused it hurts you deeply. Yeah, totally. I didn't feel like I was a man anymore. She took that from me. I don't know who I am. I feel like a lot of pain over it. I'm just kind of lost. We understand tragically it's this type of moment you can never truly escape, knowing that what you were given at birth, your masculinity, has been ripped from you by this Amazon. Dude, right. I don't think I can ever get over it. It's just going to haunt, This is who I've always been, a man, and now I'm not. So like, I'm just something now, something I don't want to be, I guess. It isn't ideal, but the only thing you can do in this situation is to tell everyone what happened and then find a quick way to end your agony. And then later on, we see that Marine grab a gun and blow his own brains out, kind of insinuating that the suicides among soldiers and Marine and airmen and sailors and coasties and all these people, they're all because of lies or whatever. And I just don't think it's handled very well. I don't have a problem with showing or highlighting suicide among military members. It's basically an epidemic at this point. In fact, if you go and look at the numbers, the leading cause of death amongst like U.S. service members is suicide. The second leading cause is unintentional death, which includes like death in combat. Like more people were killing themselves all the way through Iraq and Afghanistan than were dying in combat. Like that's a pretty startling number. And it's basically this, I don't know, it's something that's out there that people know that it's out there, but they do not want to talk about this epidemic of suicide that is, essentially plaguing armed services. And it's not just armed services. I think cops have a very high level of suicide as well. I think firefighters as well. Basically, like if you're in a profession where you have to go and put yourself in harm's way and you have to go out there and protect people, in order to do that, you have to go out and experience things that maybe a lot of times you didn't even want to know existed. To be quite frank with you, just crazy stuff out there. And there's a lot of things that go into it. Obviously, like generally speaking, when someone joins the military, they're almost uprooted from their entire family and friend structure. Like all the people that have been there to support them their entire lives are removed. A lot of times when you're like a direct line supervisor, like you're a staff sergeant in the Air Force or tech sergeant, like you've got to be mom, dad, grandma, best friend, cousin, all that stuff just to take care of this person and get them, going off on the right foot. And I've certainly had situations. We had a young lady that ended up in the hospital that had tried to commit suicide. Thankfully, she was not successful, but she was in the Navy. She was a sailor, never even had been on a ship. This was her first duty station, but it wasn't good for her. It wasn't healthy for her because she was away from all that support structure. I know that she's doing much better now, but she's not in the Navy anymore. And she had to have a change of scenery in what she was doing with her life. So it can be something as simple as just being uprooted from everything and being put with all these new people and feeling isolated and alone, like you can't talk to anybody, and bad things can happen. And that can be very traumatic. But, also for the last 20 or whatever years, we were in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan myself. I've never been in Iraq where Tom was. But when you're like on a small base in the middle of nowhere, a lot of weird stuff happens in the course of like just 365 days. And, when I arrived, I was engaged. All these guys were engaged. We're all married. By the time we're going back, I bet you half the marriages were over. Divorces, divorce papers were in. Relationships ruined forever. The ability for fathers to look over their children and live with them, all taken away during that deployment. I would say half of the engagements were over at that point. So it can have a very detrimental effect on your personal life and your home life and all that stuff. I remember when I was in Omaha, a buddy of mine, he had just gotten back from a deployment. He was in the Army. He had gone out and done like a kind of a special deployment. He was talking about that he was working with this guy from another unit, and he had taken that deployment. I think he was an E4. He was probably going to get promoted to E5. But they told him, if you go and take this deployment to Iraq, we'll give you $15,000 when you get there, so it'll be tax-free. And that's the reason he did it. He was married. He had a very young child. I think 3 months into his deployment, he had gotten the check. He looked in his bank account, and the money was gone. And he called up his house to talk to his wife, and another dude answered and told him not to call back. Don't worry about this. I got it handled. And his wife had left him, taken all of the money that he had gotten paid while he was deployed, moved this guy into their house. He was driving his truck and taking care of his son. All that stuff can be very traumatic. There's no lies about any of this stuff. All this stuff is real. The emotional trauma and physical trauma that these young men and women, in the armed forces end up going through. There's no lassos of lies needed for these things to happen and for the worst case scenario to happen. Like, bad things happen a lot. I remember when I was in Afghanistan, I wasn't going out on patrol. I'm not going to say that I was, but I was with a brigade. There's probably like 2,000 to 2,500 guys, something like that in the whole unit. I was on the main base where the headquarters was. And one of the things that was going on is once the insurgents or whatever in Afghanistan, where we were, figured out what we were doing, they would like blow up bombs in the middle of the road. It was little, but they were IEDs because they knew people would exfil, and they had put like IEDs in trees so they would blow down on our guys because they didn't want to kill them. They just wanted to blow their arms off. They just wanted to blow their legs off. They wanted to destroy their faces and just maim them. And that's what we were going through for like 6 months straight. Like, that takes a toll on somebody. There's no lassos of lies needed. 4 hours prior, you're sitting in the barracks or in your tent or whatever, playing cards with your best buddy, and you're talking about your relationship and what's going on with your son, or you found out he was getting divorced or whatever. Next thing you know, he's missing both his arms, and you're trying to get him back into your armored vehicle, hoping that he's going to make it as you're putting tourniquets on. Like, there's a lot of crazy stuff that goes on. And Tom King was with these guys. They were providing security for him. These are the guys that were at the gate providing security, so he didn't have to worry about this stuff. And for him to throw this storyline in there for no real reason other than to demonstrate that the sovereign guy can use the lasso of lies to manipulate people. Like, there are other ways that he could do this, but he wouldn't have had a soldier commit suicide. He wouldn't have had a Marine commit suicide. This is a real life epidemic going on right now, and it's still going on. I think there's been 30,000 suicides among U.S. service members since 9/11 started. 30,000. 30,000. Tell me that's not an epidemic. That is an enormous number of people that were in the armed services post 9/11 that have killed themselves. And I think we could treat it with a little bit more respect and understanding of what these guys are going through, and understanding that there's no lassos of lies needed. The positions that we put people in, the strains that we put them on in physically and emotionally, and all this stuff, as you twist them around into pieces, eventually some people are going to break. There are a couple of things that happened to me that I witnessed that are still with me, but I don't really dwell on them. I don't really have a lot of bad moments about it, but they do get me every once in a while. But they do absolutely dominate some people's lives after the fact when you can only see so much bullshit and be immune to it. Eventually, some people are going to break. And Tom King should know that. That's my point. He's not a veteran. He wasn't in the military. He was in the CIA. But he was working with those people. He was eating next to them. He was talking to those people. They were providing security for him. And I don't think he cares. Not that he has to. But we can understand that it's a staggering amount of suicides that have been going on. The suicide rate among military members, it's heartbreaking. And what we put these people through, it was heartbreaking. I remember, when I was deployed, we had that moment remember when the Qurans got burned or whatever, and next thing you know, there was like these sniper incidences. Less than 2 miles away from my base, 2 people got taken out by a sniper. We were walking around the base, magazines in, while the Afghan National Army, who were kind of co-located, they had their own space, but we were walking around in the same base. They were fully loaded too. I was waiting for one of those guys to shoot me. It literally, I thought it was going to happen. When we're walking out at night, no one was ever going to be able to see who did it. It was a tremendous amount of stress. I remember my hair started falling out a little bit. I was having like these weird pains going up and down my left arm. I thought I was having heart attacks. We put a lot of people through a lot of stuff. Like there was one guy, I think he was within 3 miles of my fob. Obviously he was in the same unit that I was supporting. I wasn't in the Army, but I was supporting the Army there. And he'd been on, I think, five deployments in 7 years or something like that to Afghanistan and Iraq. He walked off the base and started shooting civilians. And what he did was disgusting. And there's I can't even fathom doing that. And it's fucking heinous. And what he did was a crime, and he deserves everything that he got. But you can only break people so much, and twist them around and have them do things that are just traumatic to them before bad shit happens. And one of those outcomes, unfortunately, has been, just an epidemic of suicides over the last few years. And we can acknowledge that you don't need the lasso of lies or manipulation to break somebody down wholly to where they don't want to experience life anymore, where they think everyone would be better off without them. And a lot of these people need a lot of help. They're holding on by a thread. And this guy's got this fucking bullshit storyline in Wonder Woman 3. I don't know. It just made me sick my stomach. There's no other way to put it. And he's a habitual line stepper. He's always trying to fuck up all these heroes and stuff. And maybe I am overly sensitive about this stuff, but I am very fucking sensitive. I've seen too many people, too many really good people, really get broken down and permanently damaged. Maybe they don't commit suicide, but they're haunted by this stuff. Yet we were putting men and women through this every single day for 20 years straight. But it was the lasso of lies, right? It's just a story. What does Tom King know anyway? It's not like he was stationed on a base with military members, seeing what they were going through, seeing all the trauma, all the hardship they were going through, losing their loved ones, marriages being dissolved, best friends getting blown up to pieces in front of them. It was the lasso of lies, right? I mean, I shouldn't be taking this seriously. And I'm just tired of guys or people just making excuses for this guy. He's not a great writer. He's a competent writer that has a good idea every once in a while that can never get out of his own fucking way. And I've talked about this a time or two, talking about how Tom King is absolutely his own worst enemy. I kind of broke it all down right here. Better than I did right now, because this was more of a rant on suicide and what we were putting soldiers through. But this was also very interesting, more about Tom King and his writing as well. There's also a link in the video description.